Hey everyone, my name is Tyler Richards. I'm a data scientist here at Snowflake, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about how Streamlit uses Streamlit. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I've been making Streamlit apps a ton over the course of the past couple years. First, while I was at Meta, I was working on integrity problems, and I found this new open source Python library that I really loved and solved lots of the problems that I have. And so I started using Streamlit, which is the fastest way to make data apps. Right after that, I liked it so much that I decided to write a book on Streamlit. And then after that book was published, the Streamlit team reached out to me. They were like, if you have enough conviction to write a book on Streamlit, do you want to just come and work on Streamlit directly? And then I've been at Streamlit ever since. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So for the agenda today, I'm really just going to talk to you all about three different things. The first is an introduction to the data science product team. And so that's just going to be who it is, what we do, what's our remit, that sort of stuff. The second thing is going to be an introduction to the product feedback loops that we have, how we think about feedback loops within Streamlit, how we think about the open source community and creating new products and all of that sort of fun stuff. And then the third thing I'm going to chat about is this thing that we're really calling Streamlit hacks, which is stuff that the data team has built on top of Streamlit. There's three of these different hacks that I'll chat about. One is the new multi-page app design. The second is URL syncing. And the third is this filtering UI that we built. There's really two reasons that we're going to talk about these Streamlit hacks. One is to really stretch the bounds of what you all think is possible within Streamlit. And then the second is to try and help you all understand how we use dogfooding practically so you might be able to take it back to your own teams. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and get started. So the Streamlit data product team, who are we? There's four of us at the moment. There's Arnaud in the top left. We have Zachary in the top right. We have me on the bottom right, and then Katrina on the bottom left. We have a pretty standard remit for most of the stuff that you see in that little circle. So some of the work that we do is in analytics and measurement and prediction, and those are very typical for data science teams. We have a little bit of a different purpose because we're also very close to the product teams. And so this means that we spend a lot of time thinking about different product ideas and dogfooding the Streamlit open source library that we have. So when there's a new feature that the open source team makes, we're usually the first people to try it out and give feedback in that way. And then as a part of this, we also spend a lot of time in like Streamlit evangelism. So we write lots of different blog posts. We spend lots of time talking to the open source community. We spend time giving talks like these. And really the reason that we do this is that we are a pretty good analogy for the ideal users of Streamlit as a data team. We're able to give pretty actionable feedback to product teams and able to explain the learnings that we have to the open source community and to companies. So that's really the data product team and who we are. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about the internal feedback loop that we have within Streamlit. So this is really where the Streamlit data team comes in, where instead of the feedback loop going from the open source team to the Streamlit community, it goes between the Streamlit open source team and the Streamlit data team. And so what this actually looks like is one, you have a set of new feature ideas that come from the Streamlit open source team and go over to the Streamlit data team. And this could come in a bunch of different ways. It can be a new command that the open source team is trying to create. Maybe they have a multi-page app set up that they would like to release, or they have a new color scheme for the SD line chart, or some new parameters that they want to stick into a current command that we already have. And they pass it over to us, and they either run us through the idea or run us through maybe a demo that they already have. And then we really go ahead and dogfood and test it out. So the benefit from the open source team side is that one, they get the ideas much faster. So they get the feedback much faster than they would if they created the entire project, had to release it, and then get feedback afterwards. So they can get feedback in a matter of days instead of maybe weeks or months. And then the other part is that we essentially have the ability to do a little bit of quality control on the stuff that we're going to release to the open source community. So we essentially will test new stuff that has already been created and find the edges of the software to see, oh, this works in these instances and doesn't work in these instances. Maybe the docs that we have created aren't exactly up to par. We just really get to have a bunch of fun, being the quality control stuff for new features. And Not only that, but the Streamlit data team gets a huge benefit from this as well. One of the main ones is that we get to try all the cool stuff that the open source team creates. So all of us are obviously big fans of the Streamlit library, and so we use it all the time. And so whenever we come up with new ideas or we're trying something new out, we just get really excited about being able to try this stuff out. And then the second part of this is that we really do get to have the product input that data teams very, very often want. And we certainly want it. I know most of the colleagues that I have and other data teams, both within Snowflake and outside of Snowflake, are really looking for the ability to influence the product, and dogfooding on crucial product features is just a really good way of having that product input and having that product influence. And very practically, the feedback that we give will show some new app, we'll try out some new feature, and then we'll either write maybe a feedback document about what works and what doesn't, or we'll build something on top of it saying, oh, it'd be really cool if we could do, X, Y, or Z. So now that we've talked a bit about this feedback loop, I think it's a really good time to go ahead and jump into some practical examples. The practical examples that we're going to walk through are 1, the multi-page app design, 2, the URL sync, and 3 is the filtering UI. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but there's really a couple things that I hope that you all get out of this. 1, if you all are creating Streamlit apps, maybe you'll be able to use some of these hacks. We've open sourced all of them such that anyone can really use any of these. And then not only that, but I hope that it really expands the things that you all are thinking about when you're trying to create your own Streamlit apps and expands the bounds of what's possible. And then obviously the second thing is that I think it's a good example of how to dog food your own company's products and how to try to get that product influence as well. So now we're going to go ahead and head over to hack number 1, multi-page apps. So to give a little bit of background, when Streamlit first started, we had a central idea that you had one app was equal to one script. So you had a single script that was powering a single app, and that's really how it worked. It got very popular very, very quickly, and people started to want to create lots of different apps. And not only did they want to create lots of different apps, but they wanted to have one central kind of app repository for anyone in their company to go to and see all the different Streamlit apps that they had been creating. And so they had this strong desire for multi-page apps. So what was essentially happening before we launched multi-page apps as a feature is that we just had a sidebar with some radio buttons, and you could click on those different radio buttons, and then you would be able to essentially like hack your way into a multi-page app without actually having it as a central feature. And so this is what the data team really had as our project setup is we had one GitHub monorepo. And then within this GitHub monorepo, we essentially had this hacky version of multi-page apps on top of it. Now, the next thing that happened is the product team came out with this multi-page app setup that was native to the library. So you didn't have to have this really hacky solution on top of Streamlit anymore. And instead, you could essentially have all of your different apps sitting in a pages folder, and then Streamlit would automatically make this little sidebar on the left where you could see all the different apps that were in this pages folder. And so instead of it being these kind of ugly radio buttons that we had, you had a little significantly nicer way of having some multi-page apps. So then now you had a bunch of features that were supported natively. So you had a GitHub monorepo that was essentially supported natively, and you had individual scripts that were powering individual apps. Now, the data team were hitting the edges of being able to use this because of kind of one crucial thing, which is that we use Streamlit a lot. We create Streamlit apps for everything. We'll create maybe a dozen or a couple dozen Streamlit apps over the course of a quarter. And so if you're having, 24 apps that are popping into your central monorepo in a quarter, then this sidebar is not going to look very good. It's going to be very, very hard to use. I gave an example here where you essentially have, a marketing app, you have a recruiting app, you have a sales app, you have a Streamlit cloud usage app, you have another app to analyze your PyPy downloads. This isn't exactly what ours look like, but you can start to get the idea that, oh my goodness, if you have 20 apps, this starts to not work as well. So what we did is we created this hack on top of the new multi-page app setup. And instead of throwing everything in the pages file and having the pages folder really figure out the apps that you had been creating, instead you were able to define the apps that you wanted to show inside this file that it's just a YAML file called page config. And there's a bunch of cool features that we built into this. The first one is that we made it so that you could have emojis everywhere. And in the old format, you were able to have emojis in most of the places, but not exactly all. I think the coolest part is that you now have the ability to have page nesting. So as you can see on this like utility apps folder looking thing, you're able to see that, oh, example one and the custom name are under the utility apps. And so everything looks a little bit more consistent. You can imagine someone creating a bunch of folders, one that is like the engineering apps, and then a whole set of Streamlit apps underneath it that are all focused on the engineering team. And you could do that for all the different teams, which definitely helps when you have tons and tons of Streamlit apps. We also had a fun little feature where if you add the date into your page config file, then if you've created the app in the past month, then you have the little new emoji. As you can see with the example one, has the little new emoji to the right of it, so that when people go to your mono repo, they're like, oh, look at this cool new thing that has come out. And the other benefits that you get from creating stuff like this is, one, the open source team is able to learn more about how we think about multi-page apps, what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and we really get the opportunity to make a better product. And then the other benefit that you get is that we can give this to one of our other customers, which is the open source community, really, and show them how we have hacked on top of the multi-page apps, and they can edit this and really, use it however they would like. So we get lots of benefits from hacks like these. So the second hack that I wanted to talk about is this URL sync hack. Let's say that you're a data scientist at Uber and you have created this awesome Streamlit app over on the left. And the Streamlit app essentially shows you a map of New York City and the Ubers that have been called at the different places in New York City over the course of the day. And you have found this really amazing finding that happens at the 19th hour of the day, and you'd like to share that with your colleagues. The real question is, how exactly do you share this? Do you take a screenshot of this and then you send it over Slack? That kind of sucks as a way of sharing this, because the whole point is that it's an interactive app. And so essentially you've taken all the interactivity and the magic and removed it from the Streamlit app, which is not all that great. Another option is to just describe how to get to the state in the app. So you can describe it over Slack as well. You can say, hey, can you go ahead and slide the slider bar from 0 to 19? Or you can change the defaults for the app, but then what if you have multiple insights on the same app? Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it's kind of a hard problem. So this is actually a solved problem within Streamlit, and we have created the solution, and this wasn't really native to the data science team. This existed as a solution within the Streamlit community for quite a while, where people put the state of individual inputs into the URL. So then anytime you change any of the inputs, the URL changes. So when you share the URL with someone else, they'll see your Streamlit app in exactly the same state. So this is just kind of a dumb little example that we have that just has an individual checkbox, and then it's showing the state of that checkbox as well as what it looks like in the URL. And the problem that this solves is that now I can take my Streamlit apps. If I have it hosted somewhere, this will work just the same. And then I can share a link that shows exactly the Streamlit app that I am looking at. And I don't need to go through any of the other solutions that I talked about before. It's just a much better way of going about this. And we use this a lot internally. But the one thing that we noticed is not a lot of people within the community were working in this exact way. They would go through one of the other solutions. So what we decided to do is we made the kind of lowest common denominator solution, which is essentially this small app that shows kind of a toy example of how this works. And then such that it was generalizable across a bunch of different Streamlit apps. And then we just blogged about it to explain to everyone exactly how it works so they could go and they could create the same thing in their own Streamlit apps. And this has very similar benefits to the first hack, where one, we get to kind of explain to the product teams what stuff the community is finding difficult or challenging or is just like not really using. And so then they get to understand, oh, maybe we can make this a little bit easier in the future. Maybe we'll take on a couple different projects to make this URL sync automatic. You have a bunch of natural ideas that come when you figure out that something is kind of difficult. The second benefit is obviously the people that use our Streamlit apps that we create. they can share links and show the exact state. If they think something is wrong with the metrics, they can take the link and copy it and share it with us, and we can see exactly what they're talking about. And the third benefit is the open source community gets to see this example and gets to go ahead and use it within their own apps and really use it however they'd like and take it from there. Okay, and that really sums up the second hack with URL sync. So for hack number 3, we have this hack that we call the filtering UI. And this really comes from the experience of creating tons and tons of different Streamlit apps. As we've created more Streamlit apps, we notice that Streamlit apps often have 3 central components in the middle or very often at the end of their apps. One, the apps are going to take some sort of input, like a checkbox or a text input or a radio button or something else. Then they're going to use that input and filter some data. So they're going to run some pandas or some SQL on top of it and edit some underlying data frame. And then at the end, they're basically going to show that data back to the user. And this happens all the time. Maybe with the showing data, they'll use the built-in sc.dataframe function, or maybe they'll use the very popular component Streamlit Ag Grid. But really, this is a very common setup that folks have. And we started to realize that, well, this is kind of repetitive because if you know the data frame and you know the type of the column, then you would know what input you actually need to go ahead and filter that column. So if you had a date column, you know you'd have to have a date range. If you had a Boolean column, then you need like a checkbox or a button or something like that. If you had a string column, you would need text input. You kind of get the idea here. What we did is we created this filtering UI that is just a one-liner that takes in a data frame and then builds this nice UI on top of it. And you can just click the button at the top that says Add Filters, and you can go ahead and look at the different columns that you have available within your data frame, and then it'll automatically figure out what input you need in order to filter it, and then it'll show the filtered data frame at the bottom. So we use this very often when we're creating Streamlit apps to kind of let the user know that they can do their own self-serve analytics on this data. They can go ahead and, if they really want to slice and dice to figure something out that they want to look at, all of that is totally great. And so this is a very similar setup to the setup for number 2, where we have our own internal solution, we generalized this, and then we blogged about this, and then created a nice GitHub repository such that anyone can use this filtering UI fairly easily. And the example on the left is just with the classic penguins dataset. You can just see it messing around with the different types of penguins and their bill length, and just trying to figure out new things with that dataset. So as we started to create more and more of these hacks, we started to realize that we wanted to have kind of a central repository for each one of these so that folks can really just install one extra library from the data team instead of having to download a bunch of different libraries that we would create. So we created this thing that we're just calling Streamlit Extras. As you can see on the left, you have a bunch of different extras. You have the annotated text, you have the Data Frame Explorer UI, which we just talked about, and all of this is available if you just pip install Streamlit Extras. And the benefit that you get is that you get to use all the internal tools that we create. So whenever we create a new internal tool, you can just upgrade your library and you'll be able to use it, import it, and try it out. And then as we created this, we've actually seen some folks creating their own and contributing. So if you have your own little hacks that you have on top of Streamlit, we'd love to take contributions as well and chat about those. So go ahead and install Streamlit Extras and just see what the data team has made. All right, well, that really wraps up my talk about how Streamlit uses Streamlit. If you want to go ahead and follow our blog, you'll be able to see whenever we blog about new features or hacks that we've made. And then I just wanted to give a big shout out to the Streamlit data science team. So you have Arnaud, Zachary, Katrina, and then me. And then we have our Twitter and LinkedIn handles here if you want to see the other stuff that they're working on. All right, thanks so much for spending the time with me today learning about how Streamlit uses Streamlit. If you want to learn more about Streamlit, you can go ahead and just pip install Streamlit or find us on our website, streamlit.io. If you're interested in the extras that we've created and I've shown you today in this talk, you can go ahead and head over to extras.streamlitapp.com, and you'll see the ones that we've included in this talk as well as a whole bunch of others. And then, as always, we have our blog at blog.streamlit.io. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe to see a bunch of similar content. Thanks.
Feeling drained? Feel the difference when you get powered by Snowflake.
All right! Woo! 71, 72, two. Yeah!
We get it, Mark. You're powered by Snowflake now.